Right.
I do want to say that regarding the boys and that kind of conversation between these fans who are upset and the creators for what they're saying, I don't think that the these complaints of it being woke or not, I don't
Mhm.
think they are. I don't really consider that legitimate criticism either. I don't think that the show has lost it in terms of its writing. I think it's as good as it's been before, especially the later seasons. Like season three had a real crazy build up, had really interesting characters, especially that last episode of season three where everyone was coming together against Soldier Boy. I feel like they're on that same path and it's at the same quality. Sure, it's not a perfect show by
Mm.
any means.
Mm.
There are some storylines, and we'll talk about it. There's some storylines that I'm not really too crazy about. I'm hoping they pay off in the last episode tonight. But what
Mm.
I'll say is that to call this woke and just dismiss it like that, I feel like it's like calling Barbie woke. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
Barbie just like the boys, funny enough, kind of wears it on its sleeve in that it's about that. It's
Yeah.
not only satirical, but it has something to say about these things.
Right. Right.
These characters aren't just like in the comic book. In the comic book, they're just jokes. Like look at the Soldier Boy from the comic book. It is just a straight up F you to Captain America.
Of course.
you know,
Of
and
course.
the whole idea of that, whereas in
Yeah.
here they make these characters um very nuanced, I think, especially someone like Soldier Boy, Butcher, especially this season has been really the number one example of that, and I can't wait to talk about this dude, is A Train.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because he's making
I
that
mean
movie
crazy.
and
Yeah, I
yeah.
know. I mean, it's crazy. Like these characters, I feel like this show has elevated the source material, and because now it's talking about things and people who happen to also like the show beforehand, because it was talking about corporations and things they didn't like. Now that it's talking about them, I think that's more where it's coming from than actually talking about the quality of the show. Because I don't think it's diminished heavily at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like a heavy. If you ask me what season I like the best, it's probably like the first two seasons. The third one is good,
Mhm.
but I don't hate this season either. And it's not like a noticeable
Yeah.
drop where I'm like, this show now sucks. Like, no, no, no. Like, if you ask me to rank the
And
seasons,
that's that.
yeah, and that's that. You know what I mean? So like if you ask me personally to rank the seasons, I'll probably rank the fourth one as the lowest, but that
Mhm.
doesn't that doesn't mean it's the worst, not even like it's the worst show at all. I still like it. I'm entertained. I'm watching it. I've watched every episode, you know.
Yeah.
The one thing I would say, like if we were talking about storylines, the whole virus thing, I kind of wanted that to propel itself a little bit more in this season, and
Yeah.
they haven't really until this last episode, right? Like the last like
I hope so.
two episodes,
I hope so. Yeah.
they've kind of started talking about the virus that like kills the soups and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So but if we're talking about the whole season, they haven't really expanded that from like the Gen 5 show. You know what I mean? Where they
Yeah.
where they really talk about that. And I thought that was gonna be I thought that was gonna be a little bit more prominent in this season, and it hasn't been, only in the last like two, maybe three episodes. You know what I mean? And then imagine going into a show like this and then being shocked or pissed that the show is saying something. Like I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know. It just doesn't make sense. I don't know. That is kind of absurd. I think the mistake is when you just shouldn't don't just watch the show, press play, see what's on in front of you, and then judge that, because you start seeing what like the showrunners and the creator, like you said, we'll get into it, but I think
Yeah.
that's where people start getting a little bit more upset, because again, that's what kind of bothered me, is when I started looking at like the interviews and seeing what they were saying. Same thing with the acolytes, same exact thing. I was already mad at the show, but then I see like the defense, like, hey, let me see where these ideas are coming from. So I start seeing like what they're saying, and I want to know where their mindset is in creating these shows, and it only makes me more angry. So then I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna press play. I'm gonna stop looking at these interviews because
Yeah.
it pisses me off. You know what I mean?
Regarding the boys, obviously this past season has dealt with kind of the escalation of the country, the turmoil of how people look at soups and how the soups kind of use people in terms of getting their glory, feeding their egos, and actually getting into positions of government. You know, this is obviously very much like an election kind of year, and Homelander is using that to fulfill the hole in his heart since he's going through a midlife crisis. And
Right.
now, Daniel, how do you feel about kind of where this season is headed? Because season 5 is going to be the end of it, and we all know the ending of the comic book, but how do you feel about the kind of the stepping stones that they're setting up here?
Um. Well, I think I like it. I don't have an issue with it. I think it's I think obviously it leans one way because Homelander is one way. So he's a very American, he literally has the flag as his cape, And
Yeah.
so and like we were talking about earlier, the directors, they have their own ideologies and their own views on things, and that's fine. I don't mind that. I think the stepping stones now, especially the stepping stones leading up to this next episode, like you said, it's dealing a lot with the election and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it's you know, I I I I don't know if it's not doing a good job about this, but I just think that very typical of like very very much a mirror to our reality. It's like the arguments and the stepping stones that you're saying, they're not um they're not consistent. And what I mean by that is like, sure, I had a homie the other day tell me that, oh, Trump is very Homelander, and I'm like, okay, okay. This is where I mean, like the whole, like, it's not consistent because it's not like they have a superhero that, like, take poops himself while he's in the speeches, and he's so old he can't even form a sentence. There's no superhero equivalent to a Biden. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
again, I'm not offended by that. I just get offended by, not offended. I get more upset when people just aren't consistent in general.
I feel like, especially lately in this
Yeah.
political season, uh, I think, especially after the first debate, a lot of people, I think a lot of people realize that a lot of people don't pay attention to politics
Yeah. Yeah.
in a way that is
Right.
very that is needed. You know what I mean?
Right.
People latch on to headlines, reels, and in some cases, shows like The Boys, shows that are deal with politics and reference politics. I do believe that Trump or Homelander is a Trump parable,
Mhm.
for sure, especially since the people who make the show have been very open about where they're coming from.
It just is. Mhm.
There are too many parallels, especially
Yeah.
with how the last season ended, where
Of course.
we see him, laser that dude. It's a straight up reference to Trump saying that he could shoot a guy in the middle of the street and not lose any voters. And it's now, especially, that is, I feel, pretty true. I think that is one and one.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that this show, the reason why it is as captivating as it is, and even despite what you and I think about what the people making it say about it, um, the fact of the matter is we're invested in it. You know, I am
Mhm.
so curious and excited about where tonight's episode is going to leave us, and how season 5 is going to end. And
Mhm.
in terms of kind of the ignorance you're talking about and the hypocrisy and everything, I agree with that. I think that's everywhere, especially in politics, because people are flawed. and politicians are even more so flawed, and this show actually does what you're talking about, and they're examining how, celebrities in general are turned into not only like idols but heroes, and now that's getting to their heads to where they want to become gods. The scene that I found the most fascinating was uh where they bring in the Tucker Carlson guy into the Sevens meeting, and they
Oh, uh-huh.
the I forget his name, Kirk Cameron or something. I don't remember his
Cameron
name.
Coleman or something. Cameron
Cameron
Coleman.
Coleman.
Yeah.
Let's just call him Tucker Carlson. And it's where Homelander says, "Show me a little rat," and they kill him. They kill him
Yeah.
because they think he's the leak, and
Mm.
it's very telling of where they're headed. They are going to go after the government. And
Right.
I mean, again, it's on the nose. This thing, they're naming January 6th. They're saying this is when these things are going to happen. So, um,
Yeah.
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Daniel, about how,
Mm.
what people are saying, it doesn't line up because a lot of people just aren't as invested as you might be in some ways, or I might be in other ways.
I can watch the show and I'm like, oh, this is satire. I don't get my political news from the boys. You know what I mean? Like the
Right, right.
boys doesn't inform my like political, like, oh, okay, now I hate Trump because it's a parallel to Homelander. So Homelander's a bad guy. I hate Trump. Like, no, that's not. I can see the parallels, but I don't hate Trump because he's a parallel to Homelander. If that makes sense, you know what I'm saying? Like, I can just watch it and
No,
go, oh, that's a
no.
parallel.
Yeah,
But I don't
yeah.
go, oh, now I will not vote for Trump because the boys says that he's like Homelander. So like that's not how I watch the show. It just makes me upset because I know a lot of people do watch it that way. And so
Mhm.
that's what makes me upset. Like, and we're talking about the hypocrisy. Trump, they attempted on his life, and it's so funny because I've been called a conspiracy theorist because I think there's funny business, and I won't necessarily go too far into a conspiracy theory, but or a quote unquote conspiracy theory, but I will ask questions and I about certain
You should.
topics,
You
and
should
and you
ask
should,
questions,
and then people will
especially
label
with
me.
that situation.
Right, right. And people
No.
people will call me a conspiracy theorist, but now those same people that have called me a conspiracy theorist for years just for being like, "Hey, I think there's kind of funny business with this topic, that topic, whatever." Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. Why are you wearing a tinfoil hat? And now conveniently with this thing, they're like, "Oh, this is definitely a false flag."
This show does deal with that what we're currently dealing with in real life, the
It
everything you just
does.
said about
It does.
the political
The
discourse
starlighters.
and how,
Yeah.
yeah, extremism on both sides, and how
Yeah.
now it is about taking sides. I think politics has always been like that, sides,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's always been in some ways a high stakes game.
Right.
Especially in our country, election
Right.
cycles, it's all about campaigning. It's all about making these promises and everything. And I love that the show shows that the masses are susceptible to that, especially when celebrity figures become involved. There's obviously that really, I thought it was fucking hilarious scene in one of the seasons where the Deep did a Gal Gadot. Imagine. I
Yeah.
thought that was perfect. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, Homelander is a big figure who goes around preaching the woke mob, and they're trying to do this. Firecracker is one of those characters in this current season who is very much invested in what would be considered the alt-right in our
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Starlight is obviously very much progressive and on the
Right.
left. Um,
Right.
and I love that they show those sides and those ideologies clashing in this because ultimately it leads to catastrophe.
It
We saw
does.
that in our real world on January 6th.
Yeah.
They're not getting these dates and these comparisons from nowhere. They're coming
Yeah.
from real life. It's
Yeah.
not even just the comic book they're getting these things from. They're getting them from our real world, how we talk to each other, how we deal with politics, and how something as conceptual as politics affects our physical world.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I I love that angle of the show,
It's
and I'm really
almost
curious how it's going to do it
it's
in
almost
this
all
episode.
about that. It's almost all about that.
Yeah, it
Like,
is all about that.
the superheroes could just attack all the humans, but they understand that it's more about like playing the image. So it's always like they're trying to screw each other over by like exposing each other, like, oh, you did this, you did that, you did this,
Yeah.
you did that. And so we get more battles, like quote unquote battles like that, rather than like superhero fights. Do you know what I mean? Like we
Yeah,
get
no, yeah,
we,
yeah. It's
so
weird
they,
to see a superhero fight in the show. Like when they did
yeah,
it in the last
yeah,
episode, it was a little odd. Like, oh, wait a minute,
yeah,
this show has not been that for so
yeah,
much of it, you know?
yeah, yeah. It's almost like they do fight with the control of the mob rather than their superpowers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, they're using identity politics throughout the whole
Identity
show,
politics, yeah. It's all that.
like that's what it's always been. And
Mhm.
they're using media. It reminds me, I know it's based off of Garth Ennis's book, but a lot of it reminds me of Frank Miller in the way that he would depict media, in
Yeah.
something like The Dark Knight Returns, or how Paul Verhoeven would do it in RoboCop,
Or Starship
media
Troopers, yeah.
or Starship Troop. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Mhm.
Media in this film, which is
Mhm.
very much akin to real life, is
Yeah.
depicted as a tool for corporation.
Yeah.
And these
Yeah.
soups are just that. They are products from the corporate world to get
Yeah.
more money from the consumer,
Of
it's
course.
it's about everything, the show. It's not just about politics, it's about capitalism, it's about socioeconomic issues. Um,
Mhm.
it's about social issues,
Yeah.
and how people can profit from it. And
Yeah. No.
this season especially is laying it on thick.
No, yeah, that's the thing where I can see the complaints. I don't know if I agree with them, like, but I can see the complaints where people are saying like, oh, this is just like in my face. And I think I think that's more prominent because of like what you're saying, where it's just starting to mirror our real life a little bit more. I mean, even to the point where now the episodes have this disclaimer that even the episodes earlier in the season didn't have this disclaimer to the start of the show. Have you seen that disclaimer? Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
talking about? They
yeah, I
they
think so.
the earlier episodes of this season didn't even have that. It's like the later episodes started having a disclaimer where they're like, "Remember, this is fiction. This is
I
not.
mean, to
This is
be
not."
honest,
Mm.
they kind of have to now,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
I
yeah.
think too many people have been idolizing certain characters in the show, and they are
Mhm.
not differentiating the fact, fiction from reality. Like Homelander,
Yeah.
especially for people on the right, and I'm gonna say on
Mhm.
the right,
Yeah.
has
Of
been
course.
like, for some, I'm not gonna say all, but
Yeah.
for some people who are very prominent on YouTube also have like idolized the dude, and
Yeah.
making the alpha reels and shit. Like I saw this one, I'm not gonna name her because I don't want any beef, but there's this one conservative figure on YouTube who was like, she was complaining about how Homelander was being depicted in the show, and
Mm.
she's saying, yeah, because and now he's like a bad guy, when before they were making him look great. And I'm like,
What? What?
what? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What do you mean
What?
great, dude?
What are
Like,
you talking
honestly,
about?
he's so
Right.
great. He's so
Right.
awesome.
Right. Right.
Like,
Right.
that scene where he let a plane filled with people like just crash.
Yeah.
So
First season.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Alpha.
so dope. He's so alpha.
So
You know.
alpha, dude.
Yeah.
No, this is what happens, Daniel, when you get 4 seasons of Homelander and no Superman movie.
This is what happens. This is what happens. You don't get a not a counter to it, but like we all know what you and me, we grew up with Superman, like reading the
Hmm.
books, watching the movies, watching the shows, you know what I mean? So that's what I'm trying to say. We can watch Homelander and like laugh and be like, oh, and
Hmm.
understand that it's just within the confines of the show. Sure, it has parallels to reality, but we're not going to make political decisions based on what we see in The Boys. Like
Yeah,
that's
or
where that
idolize
yeah, yeah,
murderers.
yeah. Like I don't think so. Not even Eccles character. Not even that. Not even I don't
Oh,
idolize
Soldier Boy,
any.
yeah.
Yeah, Soldier Boy. These fools are fictional. They're fictional characters, man. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's I think that's where, like people are just deranged now. I think they're literally
So
deranged. Like
crazy.
I
It feels weird now to watch The Boys a little bit. The whole idea of these guys working up a way to assassinate Homeland, like kill Homelander now, especially after what happened on Saturday. It's very weird. And since Homelander is very much Trump, I will say that I think it's just too, like, I think it's just there. Um,
yeah,
there's kind of a weird eeriness to it. And I'm very
it is.
curious when they get to that point where Homelander does die, whether it be in this season or, which I doubt, but in the next season, I really wonder how that's going to feel.